So first off, thanks so much for joining us. My name's Cooper Knowlton. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a partner at Berkshire Flynn and Knowlton. And we're joined today by Barry Davidoff, who is a CPA and the principal at Davidoff Financial Consulting. This is actually the third. This is now a trilogy. This is the third time we've had Barry on. We had Barry on back in March or April when the PPP was just announced and people were scrambling to get their hands on the money. And then we had Barry on at a certain point this summer, probably in June, I think, when people were starting to think about, they had the money and starting to think about loan forgiveness. And now, I guess it's October and we're a week away from the election. And I know people have been really focused on potentially a second round of stimulus, and it doesn't look like that's coming anytime soon. I imagine after the election, there will be something that gets passed, regardless of who's in office. But I do know that there have been some significant changes to the PPP loan forgiveness application, and some things that have happened in the last week or two that affect anyone who does have a PPP loan and is thinking about loan forgiveness. So wanted to have you on to chat about some of these changes and chat about things to be thinking about as the year ends, and yeah, go from there. So maybe Barry, first off, thanks so much for joining us, and maybe you could start off by just chatting a little bit about the recent change that was made to the application.
Sure, Cooper. It's always a pleasure to be with you and your law firm and discussing PPP and other tax and financial matters. I'm a principal with Davidoff Financial Consultants here in Fairfield, Connecticut, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And on October 8th, in a very unheralded move, the Small Business Administration greatly simplified the whole issue of PPP loan forgiveness. And October 8th also is occurring for accountants at the end of the extension period for tax returns. So it's a particularly busy time for major accounting firms. As a matter of fact, October 15th is far worse than April 15th if you have a major return, because it is an absolute deadline, not something that can be extended. So it really passed the entire accounting world without any fanfare, without any notices. The accounting journals didn't even cover it until almost a week later. And then basically when I have several clients with PPP loans, so after October 15th, started looking into basically what's the latest status. And I was amazed to find the changes. And there was a headline in the New York Times financial section, and the old gray lady that sort of describes the situation perfectly. And that headline was, "Small business loans will be forgiven, but don't ask how." I think that if the New York Times is saying that, I can easily understand anyone who received the loan is even more confused.
Sure.
Okay. So first, let's discuss the deadlines and a little bit about how it keeps on being moved into the future. And at the same time, also, it's extremely political, and we'll get into that later. But with an election coming up, with basically a House and a Senate that can easily change, we need to discuss some of that. But on October 8th, what essentially happened is the Small Business Administration, acting by themselves, greatly reduced the requirements for PPP forgiveness. And there's a new form that came out that will basically, Alex from your law firm can basically put up on the screen in a few minutes. So basically what it is that on October 8th, the SBA changed the requirements for forgiveness very greatly. And it no longer required essentially any calculations. It just required for you to certify that you met the requirements. So instead of showing what your payroll was, what the amount was for rent and utilities, all that you do is you certify you just certify that it met the requirements for forgiveness, initial next to it, and it's just a simple sort of one-page form.
Yeah, Alec, why don't you pull that form up if you can, so that we can just see it.
Okay, great. So what it is that it shows essentially that it's just one page. Oddly enough, I want to draw your attention to the upper right, where it says that there's an expiration date of 10/31/2020. And that was just placed by SBA on the application, and to satisfy the Paperwork Reduction Act, because everything has to have an expiration date. The SBA makes it very clear, this is the application that will continue on long before October. So this is the valid form. Don't be put off by that expiration date. And as you can see, it's very simple. All that you're doing is you're putting in your name, the company, you're putting in the loan application number, how it was approved, when it was dispersed. And there's a thing there for the EIDL advance amount. We'll get into that, but that's not forgiven. And then if you notice, as you scroll down on the page, it's just basically asking you to initial rather than providing any calculations of what was covered or not covered by the PPP for forgiveness. So it's the normal attestations that it was used for a lawful purpose. And under PPP regulations that came out in June, 60% of it can be used for payroll, 40% for rent, utilities, and other business purposes.
So Barry, quick question. What happens? So if I go in here, let's say I got my loan amount is under $50,000. I run some basic calculations and I think that I'm entitled to $40,000 or whatever it is. 30,000 of my $40,000 loan I think should be forgiven. I put that number down and send it off to my bank. And do you think the bank is going to then do anything to confirm this in any way? Do we think that there's any like, quality control that's being done, or do we assume that they're really just going to take us at our word? And if we made a good faith effort to calculate that number accurately, we're doing as much as we need to do?
I would say that, again, is that chances are for the smaller loans and for the $50,000 and under, is that chances are the bank will just forward it on. Now, the document does require you to attach copies of your payroll or of your rent receipts as just a PDF attachment.
Okay.
Each of the banks is having their own forms. So remember, is that you're not sending this into SBA, you're sending it into your lender.
Sure.
Some of the lenders are up and running with websites that look pretty good. Others of them are going, well, we don't quite have our website ready. As of September 24th, like a month ago, over 92,000 people sent back PPP forgiveness applications to their lenders. And so far, none of them have either been approved or denied.
Wow.
Banks really don't know quite what to do with it. I think that the banks are also looking for Congress to eventually just provide blanket forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
There is a bill before the Senate that basically 30 senators have co-sponsored that said that all PPP loans below $150,000 will be automatically forgiven.
Wow.
And that's sort of what it's waiting for. And then Suncoast Bank, which is basically down Florida, Alabama, into Texas, Louisiana, is saying, we strongly advise that if you're between 50 and 150, don't apply for forgiveness now and just wait.
Yeah, that was gonna be my follow-up question to you, because when we chatted a few months ago, you were saying don't do anything at this time. You don't want to be a first mover. You want to sort of wait and see what the banks do and wait and see what the government does. Is there if assuming you got your loan between March and April or May, Are there deadlines that you need to be aware of but for forgiveness? And if we are waiting, how long can we afford to wait before we're missing one of those deadlines?
That's actually a very good question, Cooper. And what it is that the original act provided for an 8-week period for which the PPP would be used. That was extended to 24 weeks. Now that 24-week period expires for the first time on October 30th of this month. So in other words, just like a few days from now is when the expiration covered period is. Then you have 10 months after the end of the covered period to
Right.
apply for PPP forgiveness. So the earliest will be August of 2021. That's August of 2021, 10 months down the road. And this is a typical example of Congress and the administration just kicking the can down the road instead of trying to solve it. Now, since the current application that came out on October for loans under $50,000 is so simple, I would advise that over the next couple of months for people to start filling out their applications and applying, because it's not going to get any simpler than that. Then also is that the lender has 60 days from the time that they receive all materials to review the application before they then have to pass it on to SBA. Then SBA has 90 days to approve or deny forgiveness. So that's a 150-day window, almost that's 5 months. So it will take a long time to be forgiven.
So I guess for the most part, it's very few people are going to get a determination on forgiveness before the end of this calendar year, right? Before the end of 2020. So how are these loans going to be treated? I know there's some contradictory guidance from the IRS. How do you think these loans are going to be treated on the books next year, assuming some of it might get forgiven, some of it is a liability? It's complicated.
It is extremely complicated. First of all, is that IRS wants it to be that anything that was paid for with a PPP loan is no longer tax deductible. So you're basically giving $40,000 of payroll to your employees, then your business return should be showing $40,000 less on payroll expense than it did prior years. That also is subject to change because there is tremendous pressure from the American Chamber of Commerce, from basically a group of accountants, from a number of other sources to make that fully deductible, because it's just an oddity. It's something that from basically an enforcement standpoint is very, very hard for IRS to really go back to. It's very hard for basically the business to sort of segregate some of these costs. And the new PPP application doesn't even force you to segregate between what was paid in payroll, what was paid in rent, et cetera. So it is very complicated. Now, from a pure accounting standpoint, a PPP loan is a loan. It should be carried on your books as a liability. And it's up to the individual company. They can carry it either as a short-term liability, meaning that they will seek basically forgiveness of the loan within a year of the time in which the funds came into the company, or they can treat it as a long-term, meaning that they will seek forgiveness over a longer period of time, or be willing to pay the loan off over a period of what is now 5 years if the loan was granted after June.
Gotcha.
But it's up to the individual company for short or long. And what I would really do is, like in case of my clients, I will look at all the clients individually to see what looks best on their books.
Right. So there's really no kind of blanket advice. It really is going to depend on a company by company basis, and just confirms the importance of speaking to a CPA and getting ahead of this.
It really does. And I mean, and again, it also depends. The key word also is loan covenants that you may have, is that you may have other existing business loans. There may be covenants in your lease in particular that says you can't have long-term loans above a certain amount. Well, if this can be then classified as short, that will get you out of that covenant. You may have to notify your other lenders that you have a PPP, which
Right.
you should be doing anyway. And most of the lenders are neutral about it, is that they're looking upon this really as an odd form of government grant, not
Mm-hmm.
a loan that anyone expects to pay back. Now, remember again, PPP carries an interest rate of only 1% per year. So it's really good long or short-term financing.
Right. I know we have a number of clients who got SBA disaster assistance loans in addition to PPP loans. Is there similar confusion about how those are being treated and potentially loan forgiveness with the SBA with the disaster assistance loans and repayment issues?
There is considerable confusion, and what I'm more interested in is the intersection between PPP and basically the small business EIDL advance. So people were allowed up to $10,000 as the EI or EIDL for the economic disaster loan advance up to $10,000. That $10,000 is not to be forgiven at all on your PPP. Is to be handled by SBA under the normal SBA disaster loan application. And SBA disaster loan applications currently, I mean, there are very few that are being processed. SBA is sort of still bogged down in just the whole PPP program.
Do you have a sense of, with the election coming up next week, of whether or not, depending on who the new administration, if there is a new administration or if there is the same administration, how these changes, just based on sort of reading the tea leaves of what different politicians have been saying, do you have any sense of how this all could potentially change in the coming weeks or months?
I would say that generally, regardless of either Republicans or Democrats winning, there probably will be another round of PPP. Part of it is that in the original grant of about $600 billion for PPP, there's still $135 billion that was not allocated from SBA. They still have a reserve on their books for $135 billion, but haven't taken any new applications since August 8th. There's that whole trough of money, which is a lot of money. Okay. Second of all, both sides, there are Republicans and Democrats that say that PPP is a very good idea because it really is one of the few programs that is targeted towards smaller companies and also self-employed people. So that regardless of which side wins, there's probably going to be another round of PPP. And in terms of forgiveness, I have a good feeling that Senate bill for forgiving all loans automatically below 150,000 probably will pass. I think it's very hard to be opposed to really direct programs of helping small businesses if you're for small businesses from basic, it's just humanitarian. And the only people that could really be opposed to it might be people who are arch fiscal conservatives who are going, it adds to deficit. But look, with the deficit, what it is, 100 billion isn't even real money anymore.
Right. Yeah. So Barry, just to kind of, I guess if anyone does have any questions, please leave them in the chat, and we can answer a few of those because we have a few more minutes. But it does seem like the guidance, the overarching guidance, is just continue to wait and see and not rush to do anything. Is there any example though of anyone who you can think about who that may not be the case for? So for the most part, everyone's just going to sit back, see what happens with the election, see what happens over the next couple months, and there's a good chance that they'll be the terms will be more favorable. There'll be more forgiveness, and or blanket forgiveness. But is there any example of anyone who should be thinking about acting now and getting an application in for loan forgiveness immediately? Is there any kind of hypothetical situation that you could envision for why my business might want to do that?
I would say that a large number of PPP loans have been given to self-employed people.
Mhm.
So basically, all that you have to do there is fill out the one-page application, attach a copy of Schedule C from your tax return, and you're pretty much done. So it's very easy, and that way, the lender and SBA can start acting on it, and you don't have to be concerned about forgiveness at some point in the future. And it's probably about as simple as it's going to get. So I would say the self-employed people, and on self-employed people, you can basically receive forgiveness of up to $20,500 just by this one page, because
Gotcha.
you're relying upon rent or anything else.
Gotcha. I want to try to avoid specific questions, but maybe we can talk about this kind of on a more general level. Steve in the chat says he has a client with a PPP of around $400,000 and they're selling the business coming up, but they're still going to be able to collect receivables. If they apply before 11/1, will they be okay? Assuming if they apply for forgiveness before 11/1, I'm assuming that's what that means.
All right, is that basically for that, it requires the longer form forgiveness application, and they can start applying for it. The key there is to speak to the lender, and many of the banking sites that I looked at over the last 3 days are saying call up your basically lender representative and speak to them. Is the lender even willing to receive the application?
Right.
Or does the lender want to wait? And obviously if the lender wants to wait, then basically wait. If the lender is willing to receive it, start sending in the documentation, start sending in the calculations, because the bank itself will take a long time. Also, there's a tremendous learning curve on the whole process. So the people who applied for PPP on the first week, basically it took forever because they didn't quite know how to administer it. Similarly, if you're at the early part of the application, you're on the wrong side of the learning curve for the bank.
Right.
Spend a long time on it. They're going to basically dither with you on all of your calculations. If, however, you get sort of in the mad rush, there's a lot of advantages in being in that mad rush situation because the bank will just approve it.
Gotcha. All right. Let me just make sure there's no the lender. Yeah, Steve's saying that that's correct, and the lender had no guidance. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I don't see any other questions popping up. But Barry, I think it's very likely that a lot is going to change in the next couple months. So maybe we'll turn the trilogy into I don't know what a 4-event series is called, but hopefully we can get you back on in a couple months and talk more about this, because I'm assuming at the end of the year there are going to be a lot of people who are thinking more about this and trying to figure out if they should apply for another round or what that will look like, or apply for forgiveness. And certainly if there's another round, there's going to be a lot of craziness.
I fully expect that there's going to be another round regardless of who wins. And that round, and again, if the Democrats win, that round will probably be in January. For just that way, it's like a landmark and a trademark of the new administration. If basically the Republicans win, that a new trough can open up maybe in December before end of year.
Right. Sandra, last thing Sandra said, if we need help submitting, who do we call? And I guess you would either advise to talk to your CPA or call your lender and ask questions directly to your lender.
Right, and by and large also is that, as is always the case with the seminars, with the webinars that we have, I'm also willing to spend a few minutes just chatting with someone who has like a couple of broad questions without giving official CPA advice, et cetera. But frequently I can help you, at least steer you in the right direction, but I'm happy to do that for all your law firm's clients and to have a discussion with them.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Barry. Really appreciate that. We will we'll likely circulate this video around in the next couple of days, and we'll certainly include your contact information with that. But Barry, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your day. Really appreciate your time, your knowledge. This was very helpful to I'm sure everyone who joined, and I'm sure this will get a lot of views once we post it as well.
Thanks so much, Cooper, and always a pleasure.
Thanks, Barry. Enjoy your day. Take care.